I'm Mary Claire Speckner with the Bartholomew County Public Library, and welcome to our program tonight. Our presenter is James H. Madison, the Thomas and Catherine Miller Professor of History Emeritus at Indiana University. Dr. Madison was with us 4 years ago to talk about his book, Hoosiers, A New History of Indiana. And tonight, he's going to share with us his latest book, The Ku Klux Klan in the Heartland. And we do have a couple copies of that book and hard copy. They're both checked out. You can put a reserve on it. And we also have the e-version of the book. Before we begin, I wanted to recognize Tessa Hirons in our digital underground, who's handling the technical aspects of the program. And if you have questions, you can enter them in the comments section, and Tessa will relay those to Dr. Madison at the end of the program. Now, over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Mary Claire. And thank you all for showing up tonight. I'm going to get my screen started here in just a minute. And on a beautiful, beautiful fall evening, I almost said summer evening in Southern Indiana. I'm going to talk about this book as quickly as I can, even though it's a terribly complex subject, and hope that we have some time for discussion. So if you have questions and can hold them until I get through these slides and my comments, I'd be delighted to have your comments, your reaction, your questions. This is a tough subject, the Ku Klux Klan. It causes a lot of anxiety. What do we do with it? One way to respond to the Klan is just to ignore it, pretend it didn't really happen or it'll go away. And in much of Indiana for a long, long time, for decades, that was the route chosen by many Hoosiers. We can also make stories that aren't based in fact, stories that are myths, that comfort us, that make us feel good, a kind of patriotic history that some call for sometimes, really a fake history. We do want to feel good about our past, about our state, about our communities. This is the kind of Indiana we love. This is the great Brown County photographer, Frank Hohenberg, probably about this time of the year, a scene of nostalgia, the pumpkins and the corn in the field. That's the Indiana we love. But there's this Indiana of burning crosses all across the state in the 1920s. Scenes like this in fields and on courthouse squares and in the great city of Columbus, Indiana, in June of 1923. One of the important questions is to ask whether the Klan is just a sidebar to our history, whether it was a fluke event, and if so, it's not really very important, or whether it was actually a mainstream event at the center of our history. And I believe that it is at the center of our history. This is the national gathering of Klan marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1926, an indication of their power, their size, their appeal. Let me read to you just the first short paragraph of this book to set the stage. The Ku Klux Klan of the 1920s was as dark as the night and as American as apple pie. More forcefully than any organization before or since, it pushed into the national conversation the question of who is an American. Klan answers came in voices of extraordinary power. Those voices ring down into the 21st century, even if the tones have changed. A central purpose of this book is to demonstrate that there can be no American history without a history of the Ku Klux Klan. So I'm going to try to argue tonight that the Klan is a mainstream event, and begin by reminding you it was not a Southern event. It was in the Reconstruction period after the war. That's a very different Klan, but the Klan of the 1920s was a national organization from the Atlantic to the Pacific, across Pennsylvania and Ohio and the Midwest, all the way to Washington State and Oregon and California. It attracted large numbers of Northerners, perhaps more Northerners than in the South. A fundamental question is who joined the Klan? Here's a Klan manual recruiting people of interest to white, Protestant, native-born Americans who want to keep America American. One of the comforting myths is that the people who joined were hillbillies. A journalist called them, when he came to Indiana to report on the Klan in 1926, the great unteachables, the unwashed, the rednecks, the ne'er-do-wells. That myth is totally false. That myth is simply not true. It was good Hoosiers, middle-class Hoosiers, educated Hoosiers who joined the Klan. All of them were white, native-born Protestants, joining an organization that they felt and believed was perfectly normal, but a Ford dealer in Indianapolis was quite willing to include in his newspaper ad patronage of 100% Americans, served by 100% American workmen. That phrase, 100% American, runs through Klan propaganda and speeches and gatherings. It, to my mind, is a very dangerous phrase, a very dangerous idea, that someone can decide who is 100% American and who is less than 100% American is, I believe, a slippery road downhill. One of the important mainstream aspects of the Klan in Indiana in the 20s was its relationship to the Protestant churches. There was a very close relationship between the Methodists, the Baptists, the Disciples of Christ, the other mainline Protestant churches, and the Ku Klux Klan. Many of the best Protestant ministers preached powerful sermons and talks advocating joining the Klan, supporting the Klan. Some were paid spokesmen for the Klan. A close relationship between the churches and the Klan. I don't want to denigrate religious belief of any sort. I want to acknowledge that the religious beliefs of many of the people in these churches and many of the members of the Klan were genuine, were real. There's a deep faith across Indiana. I love this photograph of a baptism in southern Indiana in the 1920s. It signifies that kind of commitment, that kind of faith. This is a scene that was not unusual at all. On a Sunday morning, robed Klansmen walked into a Protestant church, this one in northern Indiana, the Disciples of Christ Church, marched down the aisle to the altar and placed a wad of cash, a financial offering, on the altar plate. Turned around as the choir in the congregation sang, often the Old Rugged Cross, one of the favorite hymns of the day, and marched out, signifying the significance of the Klan to religion, to Protestantism. There were lots of Klan funerals. I have a little article coming out in Traces, the Indiana Historical Society magazine, any day now, on Klan funerals. It's an unusual subject in some ways, but it's a great subject, I think, for opening up a broader, deeper understanding of this organization. There was a Klan funeral, the first one by Klan women in Columbus, Indiana. I have the newspaper clipping here from the Columbus Republic, November 13th, 1923, in which a quartet of Klan women sang, the pallbearers all dressed in their robes. This is not the image, this is from somewhere else. I don't have an image of the Columbus funeral. It's the first one, doubtless others followed, of Klan women conducting a funeral for one of their own deceased. The Klan thrived on enemies. The Klan was really good at creating enemies, of creating a fear that there were people out there who were trying to destroy us, our way of life, our America, the America of 100% Americans. And at the top of the enemies list were Catholics. It's a hard subject to understand in the 21st century for young people, especially they don't remember the 1960 election of John Kennedy, the first Catholic president to be elected. There's a deep anti-Catholicism in Protestant America that goes back to Puritan times. It was very, very vibrant in the 1920s. It was the air that most Protestants believed. There was something about Catholics that made them different. They had this foreign pope. They had all this ritual. They had all this hierarchy. They had a clergy that were celibate. They had all sorts of things that were not like the Methodists and the Baptists. And that tree of Catholicism of Rome must come down, the Klan said. There were Klan conspiracies. The Klan newspaper and other sources are full of these allegations of Catholics engaging in conspiracies, even violence, planning violence to take over America, to take over Protestant America. allied with Catholics are immigrants because many immigrants were Catholic, especially the new immigrants from Eastern Europe, from Poland and Lithuania, from Southern Europe, from Italy and from Greece. Catholic and Jewish immigrants who seem so different from the old immigrants, even the German and Irish immigrants who had their own difficulties earlier in America. And the Klan preached again and again about the dangers of immigration, of dumping this refuge, these undesirables, this trash, this rubbish on the shores of America. Something must be done, the Klan said. What about these people from places that are not like us? There's a gathering of school children. They're actually in a library in Gary, Indiana, and they're proud of their origin or their family's origin in Italy and Yugoslavia and Greece and Czechoslovakia and Spain and Croatia. But Klan members were not. These were the people who were dangerous. The Klan pushed hard for restriction on immigration in the early 1920s and succeeded in 1924 with one of the most important Immigration Act in American history. Sometimes called the National Origins Quota Act. It set a quota for each country, the number of immigrants that could come to America from each country. And it varied depending really on the desirability of those immigrants. So more could come from Great Britain, even Germany, far fewer from Poland or Italy, and from Asia, none. No more Asian immigrants to America. This was a highly discriminatory policy, which really changed the face of immigration in America from 1924 until it was finally overturned with new immigration law in 1965. This is the work of many organizations, of many leaders and groups, but especially of the Ku Klux Klan, and the Klan was exceedingly proud of this great, great victory for America. Catholics and immigrants are the enemy, but so too are the old enemies of America from the very beginning, Jews. The anti-Semitism is also deep in America. In the 1920s, the Ivy League schools did not accept Jewish students. There were all manner of discrimination against Jewish Americans in all kinds of ways. Most country clubs in America would not admit Jewish members. All sorts of ways in which native-born white Protestant Americans enacted their belief in anti-Semitism. And of course, you know, on this list of enemies are African Americans. African Americans are always on the list of enemies, again, from the beginning, from 1619. They are assigned to second-class status, denied the privileges of voting, the privileges of citizenship, denied access to public accommodations. In Indiana, as late as the 1950s and 60s, there were hotels and restaurants and swimming pools in which African Americans could not enter. This was stirred in the 20s by all sorts of forces, but particularly by this powerful film, Birth of a Nation. Some of you may have seen it. I would recommend that you watch it, that you look at it and think about it. It's full of racial stereotypes. It's horrible to watch, but it's an important insight into the way in which not just Southerners, but so many Northern white people thought about African Americans. This film played across the Midwest in the 1920s. It played in downtown Columbus. And this is what the Columbus Republic wrote about it when it showed up on the screen there. A powerful, powerful film. One of many indicators of white racism. So these are the enemies: Catholics, immigrants, Jews, African Americans, and we'd like to just sink them in the ocean, this Klan spokesman said. They couldn't do that, of course. There are limitations, but they could find ways in which to deny all of these groups their status as 100% American. Added to all of this is an idea that's very powerful in the teens and 20s. It's called eugenics. It's a scientific notion of the day, that there was a hierarchy of races, that the races were very different culturally. At the top, of course, were white people, and you go down the hierarchy, down the pyramid, the darker the skin, the less perfect the race in the group is. And of course, African Americans are at the bottom. This science of eugenics is taught at American universities, at Yale, at IU, at Berkeley, at Stanford in the 1920s. We now know, and we've known for a long time, that it's poppycock. There is absolutely no basis for this kind of hierarchy of races whatsoever. As popular it was in the 20s, it did not die away afterward. It continued, and it still exists in America. There's still in parts of white America expressions of belief in this kind of racial pyramid. Part of this also is a belief of fear, and the Klan was very good at promoting this fear that the white race was in decline, that whites were committing racial suicide by the increasing numbers of Catholics and immigrants and Blacks, that they were going to take over America, a fear that also persists to our own time. And you can see that in our current news and in the very recent accounts on the part of some in America who believe that whites are committing race suicide. What is happening, of course, is a demographic change of significance, but not race suicide. There are other issues. The Klan was a reform organization dedicated to making America better. And one of the great evils in America, many Klan members believe, was alcohol. This was a time of prohibition. You could not legally buy, sell, or manufacture booze, but there was lots of illegal stuff going on all over Indiana, especially in southern Indiana. I don't know the stories, but I'll bet there are rum runners and blind tigers and booze joints in Columbus or outside of Columbus in the rural areas. This really upset the Klan. And they set about to enforce prohibition. They used vigilante activity of all sorts to try to stop the use of alcohol and all the consequences that the Klan believed came from it. There's also what young people are doing in the 1920s. This is the roaring 20s. This is the age of the flapper. Some people said these young women didn't even wear underwear as they gyrated on the dance floor. There were new Hollywood films. These are all silent films, but they're quite salacious, at least to traditionalists of the 1920s, full of disregard for conventions. These played across Indiana, these kinds of films full of sex and of sin as the Klan saw it. I want to emphasize that many Klan members joined out of genuine religious belief. Many joined out of genuine belief in the purposes of the Klan. They were not embarrassed. They were not shy. They were not apologetic. They were proud to be members of the Ku Klux Klan, men and women. And so they posed, as this group does in Hartford City, with their masks raised to show the world who they were. Here they're posing between the American flag and the Christian flag, the two symbols of the Klan's ideology and ideals. And here's a group of Klanswomen in Newcastle. Only one on our right has her mask down. The rest are standing defiantly, proudly, members of the Ku Klux Klan. Women are very important to the Klan. There were gender differences. Men had some trouble with women. Some of these women get uppity. They had been involved in the suffrage movement, which reached its victory just a few years earlier. They wanted to move out of the home and the kitchen and into the public sphere. They wanted to engage in reform and moral reform. They were concerned about schools. They were concerned about corruption. And they found a way to act on those concerns by joining the Klan, celebrated in these two pieces of sheet music, one having to do with public schools, that's a Little Red Schoolhouse on the left, and the other standing against the bigotry, the graft, the anarchy coming from across the Atlantic Ocean. This is a sophisticated organization. They're not a bunch of bumbling rubes. They know what they're doing. Here's a manual for organizing local klaverns, which organized in all 92 counties of Indiana, for how to collect dues, how to conduct funerals, how to carry out meetings, what kinds of songs to sing, how to have social activities, carefully planned and thought out by a very sophisticated, organized, well-run business organization. One of the things the Klan did very well was to put on performances, theatrical events, most of all parades, fantastic parades. There's an article in the Columbus Republic about the largest parade, so the reporter says, in the history of Columbus, a Klan parade down Washington Street. This one is in Anderson, the American flag leading the way, and the road marchers going on and on and on into the night. These parades often, almost always, had a marching band, sometimes 2 or 3 marching bands. It's a great era of marching bands. This is the band from Muncie, Indiana, in their purple Klan capes. They claim to be the best marching band in Indiana, one of the best in the Midwest. They traveled all over the state and around the Midwest to marching Klan parades. I like this photograph. I played in a marching band, and I like this saxophone on the front left in this Klan marching band from Muncie, because from other sources we know that the saxophone was a kind of scary instrument for traditionalists in the 1920s. It really was the instrument of the devil. It caused young people on dance floors to do things they ought not to have done. It was just too wild. It had a kind of African-American style to it when played in certain kinds of ways. But here's the saxophone in the Klan marching band. Here's an all-girls marching band ready to set off in a nighttime parade. The cars with their electric crosses lined up behind them, ready to march down the street, the main street of Newcastle. The Klan also was very, very good at putting on rallies, at organizing these events all over the state fairgrounds, at county fairgrounds, and this big one in Kokomo, maybe the biggest Klan rally in American history. People from all over the Midwest took the Interurban, traveled to Kokomo over the 4th of July in 1923 for this huge rally. It went on for several days with picnics and entertainment and speeches, and of course the lighting of a fiery cross at night to culminate the event. This is the Grand Clavern in Kokomo. The Klan produced sheet music as part of its effort to educate and recruit members. This one, the bright fiery cross, sung to the tune of the old rugged cross. I spent some time when I was working on this book, not much fun, checking out the websites of the white supremacist group. And there's one, I'm not going to mention the name, where they have this downloaded and you can hear a chorus from the 1920s singing the bright fiery cross. Klan made its own record recordings in Jeanette Studios in Richmond, a very famous recording studio that recorded Louis Armstrong, the black trumpet player, and also Klan records, lots of Klan records coming out of Richmond, Indiana, another way in which they communicated. And most sophisticated, the Klan made its own films. There's all this stuff coming out of Hollywood, full of flappers and sin and disgusting things. And of course, the stuff coming out of Hollywood, the Klan always told us in its newspaper and elsewhere, was made by Jews, which makes it even more dangerous. So the Klan made its own 100% films. This one, The Traitor Within, was made in Indianapolis by the Cavalier Motion Picture Company. It showed across the Midwest. This is a big showing at a major venue in downtown Indianapolis. And a second film, The Toll of Justice, made in Columbus, Ohio, but also showed in Indiana, this showing in Greenfield, but across the state. Klan films. Klan films using the techniques of Hollywood filmmakers to promote the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan had its own newspaper, The Fiery Cross, published in downtown Indianapolis. Good librarians, and gosh, do I like librarians, have digitized The Fiery Cross, and you can read it. Just Google it, and you can get to the issues, the published issues of the Indianapolis Fiery Cross, and read the actual words of the editorial columns, the reports from all across Indiana of Klan activity, of Klan propaganda, full of these notions that I've been talking about this evening. I spent days and days and days reading The Fiery Cross, and I must say, after the first few days, it gets very, very repetitive, very boring. But it's It's one of the sacrifices historians make for the good cause, so that I can say I've read just about every issue of the Fiery Cross, and I think I have a pretty good idea of what they said and how often they said it and what it means for understanding this organization. An organization like this is sooner or later going to go into politics. That was always in the cards. They waited until early 1924 when they had built up a huge membership. We estimate that about a third of white native-born American Protestant men in Indiana joined the Klan. That's a very, very large number, several hundred thousands of Klan members. They entered politics, and they entered in the spring primary elections, particularly in the Republican primary, also the Democratic, but especially the Republican primary, where they put up their own candidates and made clear to the voters who was a Klan candidate and who was not. They had sheets they took around and delivered to individual homes, telling the voter who they should vote for, because this person is a 100% American and that person is not. And so in the spring elections, we have the first real electoral test of Hoosiers and the Klan. And Klan candidates in the primary in May of 24 won an overwhelming majority of votes. The Klan swung into control of the Indiana Republican Party as a consequence. They celebrated with a huge parade downtown Indianapolis around Monument Circle. The newspapers say the largest parade in the history of Indianapolis. In the fall general elections, those Klan candidates in the Republican Party also won an overwhelming victory. This is the celebration of that victory on the front page of the Fiery Cross. It included the election of Governor Ed Jackson, a great Klan sympathizer in bed with the Ku Klux Klan all the way. Ed Jackson committed all sorts of nasty things. He is, in my opinion, without doubt, the worst governor the state of India has ever had for his affiliation with the Klan, for his effort to carry out Klan wishes, Klan policies, Klan programs. Ed Jackson should have gone to jail. He didn't because of a technicality. So Jackson was elected governor. The majority of the General Assembly elected in 1924 take their seat in 1925 as members of or very sympathetic to the Klan. So by early 1925, the Ku Klux Klan has become a major political force in Indiana politics, upsetting all the traditional patterns of the two parties, upsetting voter turnout and all aspects of Indiana political life. It was chaos. There's opposition to the Klan. It comes, of course, from the enemies of the Klan, Catholics above all, who are larger in number, moving into the middle class, with leaders and followers willing and able to organize to stand up to this organization. They form a group called the American Unity League that engages in speech making and propaganda, taking out pieces in ads in newspapers, and publishes their own newspaper called Tolerance. One of the things the AUL did was to, well, they never claimed credit for it, but they probably did it. Someone broke into the offices of the Klan headquarters in downtown Indianapolis and stole some membership lists, and Tolerance then published the names of Klan members going through communities. That was embarrassing for some people who did not want to be known as members of the Ku Klux Klan. Students at Notre Dame stood up to the Klan when the Klan showed up to have a big rally in South Bend. This is one Notre Dame student who managed to tear off the robe and hood of a Klan member in what the Klan referred to as a riot. These are Irish Catholics always wanting to fight. They're not decent American citizens. Look at that. Look at that nasty Irish Catholic boy. The Notre Dame administration was rather embarrassed by this event, the so-called Klan riot, but then decided to make the best of it, and in 1927 changed the official nickname of the University of Notre Dame sports teams to the Fighting Irish, a proud label that retains to this day. African Americans stood up. This is a time in which there had already been formed some local branches of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the leading civil rights, an amazingly powerful, important civil rights organization for a long time in our history, but revitalized in the 1920s. As the Klan appeared, African Americans said, we need to find a way to stand up. And the NAACP, the local branch of the NAACP, was the way to do that. This is the Indianapolis branch, which had several rallies and lectures standing up to the Klan, and which especially urged African Americans to change their traditional voting patterns. African Americans in Indiana and in the North had voted for the Republican candidate since the days of Abraham Lincoln. In 1924, for the first time, African Americans began to drift away from the Republican Party and to vote for the Democratic Party because it was less beholden to the Klan. That's the beginning of an important shift in American politics that is going to have major consequences later on. There's Jewish opposition. This is an example of one of the many rabbis who spoke out against the Klan. Indianapolis Rabbi Morris Fairlick was a distinguished leader of his congregation and of the city of Indianapolis, engaged in all sorts of good activities, including standing up to the Klan in the 20s. Some newspapers stood up to the Klan, notably Indianapolis Times, which won a Pulitzer Prize in 1928 for its investigative journalism. The Muncie Post-Democrat, which had this idiosyncratic editor, George Dale, who was so vociferous in attacking the Klan in his pages, attacking a local Delaware County judge who he claimed was a Klan member. The judge sent editor Dale to the Delaware County jail for a short time. Several years later, in 1929, the citizens of Muncie elected Dale as their mayor, a repudiation eventually of the Klan. There was opposition in Bartholomew County, and I'm hoping I can spark someone's interest to follow this story up, because I just discovered it last week when I was perusing newspapers.com, which includes the Columbus Republic, the Brown County Democrat, some other local papers. And I learned that in the Republican primary in 1924, in which the Klan swept Indiana, there was only one county in which the Klan did not sweep the election, the Republican primary, and that was in Bartholomew County. I also learned that the nomination in that primary for the congressional 4th district went to Billy Hill, a Republican who spoke strongly against the Klan. The Republic has accounts of some of his talks in Columbus and elsewhere, a strong, hard antagonist of the Ku Klux Klan, who's nominated in the primary in 1924. However, Billy Hill was defeated in the 4th district in the fall elections. He continued up to the election, up to the day of the election, to speak out against the Klan. He lost. And so the Klan did prevail. But this opposition in Bartholomew County, I cannot explain. Maybe some of you know, and probably some of you do, know more local politics and what might have sparked it. I can imagine a few possibilities, but I really don't know. And it's a very interesting subject. I hope someone someday can tell us what was going on in Bartholomew County. There were certainly tensions within the county. There was a bit of violence on election day and other times between Klan and anti-Klan citizens in Columbus and Bartholomew County. So this was a deep divide across the state, and certainly in Bartholomew County. There were individuals always who stood up. This is one example from the letters to the editors section of the Columbus newspaper. He's charging the Protestant ministers of Columbus, I think rightly so in many cases, perhaps most, with failing to stand up and condemn the reptile that has raised its ugly head, the Ku Klux Klan. So there's all kinds of opposition. However, that opposition to the Klan across the state is small, very small at the beginning. And it takes a long time, several years, for the opponents of the Klan to carry the courage and the strength to really come out and publicly condemn the Klan. There are exceptions, but the general tendency was either to join the Klan or to remain silent. It is not our proudest moment. It took a long time. There's a comforting myth that the Klan died in 1925. It's not true. And it died in 1925, this myth asserts, because of the crimes committed by this man, D.C. Stevenson, the Grand Dragon of the state of Indiana. He captures huge attention. The spotlight on Stevenson is still very, very bright. I want to say he's a very, very important leader. He's a charismatic, effective leader, and his story is exceedingly important to the Klan. But I think the main story, the big spotlight, has to be on the ordinary people across Indiana who joined the Klan, what they were doing and why they joined and how they acted and behaved, as well as on D.C. Stevenson. So Stevenson, in the spring of 1925, takes Madge Oberholzer on a train. Here she is in the front row with the dog at a younger age. She's 25 or so in 1925. And on that overnight train in a Pullman car, Stevenson assaults, rapes, and brutalizes young Madge Oberholzer. He dumps her back in her home in Irvington, a suburb of Indianapolis. She slowly dies a painful death. Before she dies, she signs a deathbed statement full of details of what Stevenson had done to her and what she knew about his life in other ways. He was anything but a representative of Klan ideals. He was a heavy drinker, a womanizer, all sorts of ways in which Stevenson's life directly contradicted in the face of the Ku Klux Klan. Stevenson was brought to trial in Noblesville, Hamilton County, in the fall of 1925. 12 white men, jurors, found him guilty and sentenced him to the Indiana State Penitentiary in Michigan City, where this mugshot was taken. That did cause some Hoosiers to move away from the Klan. Membership almost certainly dropped in many places, but the Klan was not dead as a consequence of Stevenson's crimes. The revelations, the newspapers are full of this, so everyone knew, but still many Hoosiers retained their membership in the Klan. In 1925, Republican candidates swept Indiana again. The party that was close in bed with the Ku Klux Klan, the party of Governor Ed Jackson, won majority elections with a few exceptions, even as late as 1925. Not until 1929 did the political winds shift and turn against the Klan. By 1930, for all sorts of reasons, I have a whole chapter in this book on the decline of the Klan. It's a complicated story, and I've given you just some of the highlights here, as I have of all of these issues. And so the question then after 1930, is the Klan really dead and gone? Is it finished? Is it over in Indiana? Well, not entirely. The remnants remain, if not in robes and hoods always, but in other ways. Here's the great basketball player from Shelbyville, an All-American at IU, who everywhere he went in the Big Ten, in Evanston and Ann Arbor and Champaign-Urbana, was the only African-American on the court. We've always loved the story of Tiny Milan, but I think this story of the Crispus Attucks teams is actually more important. Even Bobby Plump said that. It's a very important story in Indiana's history. And if you don't know it, watch the great film that WFYI did on Crispus Attucks High School, not just the basketball team. And of course, the Civil Rights Movement, which takes form especially in the 1960s, in the early 1960s, with protests and demonstrations and parades and young people and African Americans saying, we're not going to take this anymore. We want equality before the law. We want justice, they say. This produces the backlash. The first big sign of it is in 1964, when George Wallace comes to Indiana to run as a candidate in the Democratic presidential primary in early 1964. George Wallace was the governor of Alabama. George Wallace has promised segregation yesterday, segregation today, segregation forever. In Indiana, in that primary election, he hid his deeply segregationist racist views with code words, with dog whistles, we call them now. But it was quite clear what he was saying. It was quite clear. He pioneered in the politics of rage, of performing an outrage kind of reaction to all the things that were going on in America, especially that Black Americans were doing. And so when he comes to Indianapolis, the local NAACP pickets outside his hotel, and that's what this line of marchers is doing. And I don't need to call your attention to the white man in the foreground waving that flag. But I do want to say something about that flag. My great-great-grandfather, William Pendleton Madison, fought for that flag in the Valley of the Shenandoah. I'm not proud of that. I actually personally think he was a traitor. I personally think this is the flag of treason. You can disagree with me on that. That's quite okay. But I know it is not the flag of heritage today. I know today this is the flag of white racism. There are all sorts of people who want to claim otherwise, and maybe they believe that, but that claim is based on ignorance, because that flag represents exactly what this guy is saying it represents when he's protesting the protesters in 1964. So this backlash, this reaction against the civil rights movement gives some Hoosiers and Americans a little bit of room in which to try to revitalize the Klan. And recruitment flyers appear across Indiana in the 60s and 70s and 80s. This one with a touch of anti-Semitism. I'm not going to read you because it's kind of disgusting stuff. You can find this for yourself and read it on your own. This Klan that begins in the 60s is really focused almost exclusively on white racism. It is based upon a fear that whites are being treated as second-class citizens, that African Americans are getting way more than they deserve, that we whites have huge resentments and just angry and raging at a system that would allow this. And so the Klan began to march again. This is my favorite. I've got lots of Klan marching photos in the book. This is my favorite of them all. I like this photo for all sorts of reasons. It has the usual stuff. Men in uniform, and they often don't wear masks over their faces. Men in uniform, carrying their signs. Also men in Klan uniforms, but also men in militia-style uniforms. In Indiana, they tended not to carry weapons, which is a very, very good thing. We're blessed by that, by the absence of armed militia-type groups in Indiana in this period. But I draw your attention to the sign on the left. First of all, it's a great Hoosier sign. It's nice to be, it's nice to be white. It's not full of hate and bitterness. It's just nice to be white. I love that sentiment. It's nice to be white. But I'm an old professor, and I taught students for decades how to use its. And those of you who are educated know there are two different its, one IT apostrophe S, one ITS. I have never in my life seen I apostrophe TS. I don't want to make fun of this guy, but I just love his sign. These marches, these Klan gatherings and rallies always had more media and always more police protection because they had to protect the Klan from the large numbers of people who were protesting the Klan and threatening violence against the Klan, which of course the Klan loved to have. I want to take a minute and stop and think about those who watched these protests in our own time and those who watch them today. I love this photograph. 3 African Americans. I want to focus your attention on the woman on the left. She's got binoculars in her hand. Look at her stare as she sees these Klan people march by. We can imagine what's in her head, what she's thinking. We know that African Americans had in their families, excuse me, had in their families stories handed down for generations of the Ku Klux Klan, of white racism, of threats, of intimidation, even of violence. We know that in African-American families, there were stories of trauma, of suffering, of fear. We know that in African-American families, this mother, all Black mothers, are someday going to have the talk with their son, telling him what it means to be a Black boy in America, what it means to be driving while Black in America. That's the trauma. And the Klan, our history with the Klan, our history with white racism, is that trauma for African Americans. There was some violence in recent times, notably the bombing by two Klansmen of the Black Market, a store on Kirkwood Avenue in Bloomington, right near the university, and the murder of Carol Jenkins in Martinsville, a tragedy of major proportions that caused, down to our own time, all sorts of tensions, all sorts of enduring tensions and struggles for the people of Martinsville and for the people of Indiana. And closer to our own time, in Charlottesville, Virginia, in 2017, where white racists, Klansmen and women, militia types gathered. Someone said there was good on both sides. That statement was simply not believable. One of the main organizers of that Charlottesville rally was Matt Heimbach from Paoli in southern Indiana. Here he is in full battle dress performing his role as a white nationalist, as a white racist on the stage of America. The good news is that as the Klan has gathered, as white racists have gathered in Indiana in recent decades, they are always met by more protesters than Klan people. This one, a huge group of people who turned out to protest the gathering of a handful of Klan people in Madison just a couple of years ago. So, I've argued that the Ku Klux Klan is a mainstream organization, not a fluke, marginal in the last 50 years in some ways, but certainly not in the 1920s. It was exceptionally successful in mobilizing Americans, in selling its message to white native-born Protestants of 100% Americans, of creating enemies that needed to be feared. This is a story that does not end with the death of the Klan. The ideals of the Klan, the message of the Klan, even the words of the Klan, hidden by dog whistles and codes, continue down to our own time. It's a story, I believe, that demands that we take heed, that we listen. I love this sculpture in the Meyer Sculpture Park outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, called Listening to History. The figure's eyes are covered by the cords that bind the book of history over his ears. He cannot see, he cannot hear, he cannot read. What I believe we need to do is cut those cords. We need to read and think and talk about our history, not in bedtime stories that make us feel good, not that make us feel like 100% Americans, but adults who understand that there's never all good, that our history is full of stories, events that are tragedies, as well as heroic stories and events. I'd like to hope that America, as our greatest American of all time, Abe Lincoln said, remains the last best hope of earth. I'd like to hope that the great moral arc is bending toward justice, so that young Americans like these four kids, the greatest four kids on the face of the earth, yes, they are my grandchildren, will have a life with fewer of the tragedies that beset us in our own time. Here's my email address. I'd be happy to hear from you with questions, comments, if you wish, and I'm certainly happy to have comments and questions now. If Mary Claire has some or someone else does, send them on.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Tessa, did we have any questions? No, don't think we did. Well, thank you so much. That was really fascinating. Really enjoyed
The
that.
library is closing in 10 minutes.
We did
Please
have
finish your work. If you need assistance, ask the nearest staff member.
We did have some comments on Facebook. but no
Okay, all
questions.
right, good. Good, good.
Questions. Thanks so much. That was very
You're
interesting.
welcome.
Really
Thank you for
appreciate the
thank you for
time.
doing this.
Okay,
Thank
have
you
a
for
good
doing it.
evening.
All
Bye.
right, thank
Thanks
you.
everybody for listening.